Picture this. It is 2 in the morning.
Oh, the classic scene.
Right. The fluorescent lights of a university library are just buzzing overhead. You've got a student surrounded by a literal fortress of textbooks.
And probably, what, 3 or 4 empty coffee cups?
Exactly. 3 empty cups scattered across the desk. And they are just frantically highlighting a massive stack of paper. They are chasing a 4.0 GPA like their actual life depends on it.
I mean, it is the cinematic stereotype, right? The international student grinding their way through an elite university. It's an image we're all incredibly familiar with.
Because it's real.
Yeah, because it's built on a very real culture of compliance, high stakes, relentless academic endurance. It's a pressure cooker.
We see that image everywhere. But today, we are taking a deep dive into a fascinating profile and a collection of personal essays from an international student who completely shatters that stereotype.
They really do. It's a wild contrast.
We are looking at the journey of someone who landed in the ultra-competitive, high-pressure environment of the USC Marshall School of Business and proudly claimed the title of the chillest student in the room.
Which is, a striking juxtaposition. You do not usually associate elite, globally ranked business schools with the concept of being chill.
Definitely not.
The baseline expectation there is perpetual motion, just constantly working.
Not at all. But whether you are prepping for a high-stakes meeting or evaluating your own career trajectory, or you're just insanely curious about unconventional success stories, today's focus is going to provide some serious aha moments.
Oh, absolutely.
Because as we learn from these sources, this student's chillness was absolutely not laziness. It was like a highly calculated strategy.
A very deliberate one.
Right. So our mission today is to unpack this student's unique mindset, specifically how they ruthlessly prioritize their personal ROI return on investment over that mythical 4.0 GPA, and what that means for how we all approach our work, our learning, and the finite amount of time we have in a day.
I love this topic because the central tension running through these source documents is between the institution's definition of success and the individual's definition of value.
Which are often two very different things.
Totally. We are analyzing someone who fundamentally refused to play the game by the established rules. And what's crucial to understand early on is that they didn't do this out of some, teenage rebellion.
Right. It wasn't just them acting out.
No, it was out of a strict, almost clinical adherence to their own internal mathematics.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how someone can be so incredibly relaxed in a pressure cooker like USC Marshall, we have to look at how they were built.
The foundation.
Exactly. The profile traces this student's roots back to an alternative school in Asia. And the defining characteristic of this foundation wasn't necessarily the curriculum, but what the school explicitly refused to do.
Which was?
They literally did not rank students from 1 to 100.
See, that is a massive departure from traditional educational models.
It really is.
Particularly in many Asian educational systems, which are historically, hyper-competitive. They're heavily standardized.
Relying on those rigid numerical rankings.
Exactly. They rely on those class rankings to sort students for future opportunities. Traditional schools essentially use that ranking system to manufacture a sense of scarcity.
Right. Like if traditional schooling is a cutthroat sprint against 100 other runners, where you are constantly looking over your shoulder to see who is gaining on you.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
It is. But this alternative foundation is entirely different. The core philosophy of the school was simply you versus you.
I like that. You versus you.
Yeah, it's more like having a personal golf handicap. Or, honestly, trying to beat your own high score in a video game. Like when you're racing your own ghost car on the track in Mario Kart.
That's a great analogy.
But I do have to play devil's advocate here. Looking at human nature, does this lack of traditional ranking actually work?
How do you mean?
Well, I hear no rankings, and I immediately wonder if that just kills a person's competitive drive. I mean, without the fear of being ranked dead last on a public bulletin board, do people just stop running entirely?
What's fascinating here is that the sources suggest it does the exact opposite.
Really?
Yeah, it doesn't kill the competitive drive at all. It fundamentally mutates it. It shifts the locus of motivation entirely from extrinsic to intrinsic.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, let's look at the mechanism. In a ranked system, the brain is conditioned to seek the dopamine hit of external validation, beating the person next to you.
Right, the gold star.
Exactly. But by completely removing that 1 to 100 scale, this student never developed the traditional hunger to outstudy everyone else just for a superficial metric of superiority.
So they were never programmed to care about the status game in the first place.
Oh, the entire concept of like class valedictorian, was essentially meaningless to them.
Meaningless and, I guess, irrelevant to how they made daily decisions.
Completely irrelevant. When you are conditioned from a young age to measure your progress strictly against your past self, your competitive edge turns inward.
So you're not competing with the room.
Right. You stop asking the traditional question, how do I beat the person sitting next to me? And instead, you start asking a much more dangerous question for any rigid, hierarchical institution.
Which is
this activity actually worth my time?
wow, is this worth my time? That is the ultimate personal ROI question right there.
It changes everything.
And if you apply that lens to literally everything you do, it completely reframes how you interact with the world around you.
Because suddenly, time becomes your primary currency, not status.
That makes so much sense.
Think about how people behave in a ranked system. A student will happily spend an infinite, exhausting amount of time to gain a tiny fraction of a point, just to move from rank 4 to rank 3.
Even if they aren't actually learning anything new.
Exactly. The input of time doesn't matter to them. Only the output of status matters. But in a you versus you system, time is recognized as a strictly finite resource.
It has to be allocated efficiently to promote actual, measurable, personal growth.
Precisely.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. This internal metric of hyper-efficiency completely altered how the student approached the incredibly traditional, heavily gate-kept college application process.
Oh, this part of the profile is fascinating.
The essays mentioned that they looked at the admissions gauntlet, which is terrifying for most people, and decided to treat the entire thing like a strategy game.
Which is the logical, inevitable extension of that you versus you mindset.
How so?
Well, if an institutional system isn't a true reflection of your inherent worth, if it's just a set of arbitrary hurdles, then it stops being an intimidating judge of your character.
It just becomes a puzzle to be solved.
Exactly. A game to be won on your own terms.
And the way they solved it is wild. The essays describe how, when it came to standardized tests and written applications, the student openly admitted to having spelling mistakes.
Which is usually a massive red flag in admissions.
Right. But they didn't view these mistakes as personal failures or signs of low intelligence. They literally referred to their own spelling mistakes as, quote, glitches in the system.
I love that phrasing, glitches in the system.
It's so confident. Instead of obsessing over fixing those glitches, they leaned entirely into their natural strengths during the interviews. Their logic, their big picture thinking.
They play to their unique advantages.
Yeah, they proudly stated in the profile, I wasn't a textbook bee, I was a strategist.
The linguistic choice there is brilliant, the textbook bee versus the strategist.
It paints quite a picture.
It does. A worker bee just follows the algorithmic path laid out by the hive. It does the busy work without ever questioning the purpose of the work.
Head down, just grinding.
Right. But a strategist, on the other hand, surveys the entire board. They calculate the odds, and they allocate resources only to the squares where they will have the absolute highest impact.
Okay, I hear that, and it sounds great in theory.
But
But honestly, calling a spelling mistake a glitch in the system sounds incredibly arrogant.
it definitely borders on it.
Like, it feels like a student who thinks they are too smart for the rules. Isn't this just a really convenient, dressed-up excuse to avoid the hard, boring, tedious work of rote memorization?
That's a fair pushback.
Because spelling does matter in the professional world. You can't just send out a resume full of typos and call yourself a strategist.
It is a totally valid skepticism. It absolutely skirts the line of arrogance. But if we dive into the psychology of resource allocation here, this is actually an incredibly mature, almost ruthless exercise in personal ROI.
Walk me through their math then.
Let's break it down. The student recognized a natural strength logic and big picture articulation. And they also recognized a distinct weakness rote memorization and spelling.
Okay, pretty standard so far.
The traditional, culturally accepted advice in education is to work tirelessly on your weaknesses until you are perfectly well-rounded.
Right. The advice is to sit at your desk, make 1,000 flashcards, and drill those spelling words until you never make a typo again, ensuring nobody can criticize you.
Exactly. The system demands that you be well-rounded. But the strategist realizes that being well-rounded often just means being uniformly average at everything.
Oh, that's a sharp way to look at it.
The strategist asks the crucial question, what is the actual return on those hundreds of hours spent with flashcards?
Probably not much.
Right. If the ultimate goal of the game is simply to get accepted into the university, and the admissions interview carries significant weight because it allows a candidate to showcase dynamic logic.
Then spending massive amounts of time fixing a minor weakness is a terrible investment.
Because fixing that weakness won't yield a noticeably higher return.
Right, a perfect spelling score gets you a polite nod, but a brilliant, highly articulate interview gets you an acceptance letter.
Precisely. They optimized for the highest yield variable. They deliberately chose to be spiky, exceptional in one area and deficient in another, rather than well-rounded.
They refuse to waste their most valuable capital, which is their time and cognitive energy.
Exactly. They accepted that the spelling mistake might cost them a minor point on paper. But the dozens of hours they saved by not drilling flashcards allowed them to be infinitely more prepared, relaxed, and dynamic in the interview room.
They hacked the system. They literally looked at the admissions game, realized which parts of the game had a low payout, and simply opted out of playing those specific parts.
And we know the outcome. It worked perfectly. The strategist mindset is highly effective for penetrating rigid gate-kept systems. They get into USC Marshall.
They did. But getting past the gate is entirely different from surviving the inside of the castle.
Oh, absolutely. The dynamic changes completely once you're in.
Because what happens when that highly optimized, efficiency-obsessed mindset collides with the daily, grinding reality of being a student inside an elite business school curriculum?
That is exactly where the inevitable friction occurs.
Yeah, you have a student whose entire cognitive framework is wired for maximum efficiency, suddenly dropped into an academic environment that is fundamentally built on volume, endurance, and compliance.
It's a recipe for disaster, or at least a major clash of values.
And the source documents show exactly where that friction ignited. It was the infamous USC Marshall pre-reading.
Ah, yes, the pre-reading.
Almost immediately upon arriving, this student was suddenly facing massive stacks of case studies and hundreds of pages of dense business theory every single week.
Which is standard for an MBA or elite business undergrad program.
Totally standard. But their brain immediately started doing what it had been trained to do since their alternative elementary school. It ran the math.
They started calculating the input of cognitive effort versus the actual output of retained knowledge.
Yes, the internal equation was simply hours spent reading versus actual usable knowledge gained.
And what was the verdict?
The conclusion was brutal. They described the ROI of this pre-reading as, quote, tragic.
Tragic. That's a strong word.
It was extremely hard for them to justify spending the time, and I think anyone listening to this can relate to that feeling.
Oh, for sure. We all have those tasks.
Think about the tragic ROI tasks in your own life right now. The hour-long weekly syncs that could have been a 3-sentence email. The bureaucratic busy work that doesn't actually move the needle on your projects.
It's soul-crushing.
To me, academic pre-reading in this context is like buying a stock that completely ties up all your available capital for years, but it pays out absolute pennies in dividends.
That is an excellent way to frame it.
You are technically investing, but you are functionally losing money.
Right, because the capital being tied up is their time, their focus, and their mental bandwidth. And the dividend, the actual usable knowledge they retain from speed reading 400 pages of dense theory at midnight, is mathematically negligible.
But hold on, let me play the university side of this for a second.
Go for it.
Isn't reading the theory the entire point of going to college? You are paying an exorbitant amount of money to access the curated knowledge of experts.
True.
How can a student expect to learn anything, let alone master business strategy, if they flat out refuse to read the material provided by the institution? It feels like going to a Michelin star restaurant and refusing to eat the food because you think chewing is an inefficient use of your jaw muscles.
That's hilarious. But it raises an important question about how we fundamentally define the act of learning and how institutions validate themselves.
Okay, unpack that.
We have to separate the actual goal of education from the method of education. The goal, presumably, is knowledge acquisition, critical thinking, and competence.
Right, to actually know how to do the thing.
But the method that massive universities rely on is heavily weighted toward volume-based reading and standardized testing.
Because it's easier to grade.
Partly, yes. Volume is easy to measure.
Yeah.
What we are seeing here is a concept known as institutional risk shifting.
Wait, institutional risk shifting, how does that apply to a reading assignment?
Well, the university needs to prove to the world and to future employers that its degree is rigorous and valuable.
Sure, prestige is their whole product.
Exactly. And the easiest way to manufacture that rigor is to make the curriculum highly demanding in terms of volume.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
By assigning 400 pages a week The institution offloads the burden of rigor onto the student's free time. It guarantees that only the most compliant, enduring students will survive to get the 4.0 GPA.
Wow. So what this specific student realized is that this prescribed method of volume-heavy compliance was incredibly inefficient for actual knowledge retention.
Yes, the 4.0 GPA grind isn't necessarily a measure of pure intelligence or competence.
It's just as much a measure of endurance, obedience, and a willingness to suffer through tragic ROI.
Can you sit in the chair, suffer through the 400 pages without sleeping, and regurgitate the key terms on command? That's what it tests.
It's like trying to run high-speed trading software on a 1990s dial-up connection. The operating systems are fundamentally incompatible.
That's exactly it. For a strategist trained in a you versus you environment, time is their most valuable asset.
So the idea of spending 10 hours reading dense theory for a 2% increase in practical understanding isn't just boring to them.
No, it is fundamentally offensive to their internal operating system.
The disconnect here isn't laziness at all, is it?
Not at all. It is a massive philosophical disagreement on how human beings acquire knowledge efficiently.
And we really cannot underestimate the psychological weight of that disconnect.
Oh, trying to force compliance on a brain that is wired for efficiency creates immense stress.
The student wasn't saying, I don't want to learn business. They were looking at the syllabus and saying, this specific mechanism of learning provides a tragic return on my invested time. I am losing capital every hour I sit in this library.
Which brings us to the ultimate pivot in the source profile.
Right, because when the math simply doesn't add up, a true strategist doesn't just keep playing a losing game to save face.
They don't just put their head down, drink 3 more coffees, and suffer through the tragic ROI just because society expects them to.
They change the game entirely.
If the board is flawed, they remove themselves from the board.
And according to the essays, that's exactly what happened. This student stopped trying to force the issue. They took an official leave of absence.
A huge move.
Massive. They effectively stepped right off the incredibly prestigious, highly coveted USC Marshall treadmill. They traded the fluorescent lights of the university library for an active internship in Vietnam.
That is a staggering pivot.
They made a conscious, deliberate decision that they would rather be a chill dropout with real-world experience than a stressed-out, sleep-deprived student with a perfect GPA and absolutely zero clue how the actual world functions.
It takes guts to make that call.
It really does. So what does this all mean for us? Because let's be real about the stakes here. Dropping out, even if it is technically a temporary leave of absence, is a massive, life-altering risk.
Without a doubt.
Isn't the university degree and that high GPA the ultimate safety net? By stepping off the established path and flying to Vietnam, aren't they throwing away the exact ROI that a place like USC Marshall promises to provide on a resume? I mean, a Marshall degree opens literal doors at Fortune 500 companies.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of career strategy, we have to distinguish between theoretical, deferred ROI and immediate, practical ROI.
Okay, what's the difference there?
The traditional university degree is essentially a deferred payout. You invest 4 years of your time, your money, and your unquestioning compliance.
Right.
In exchange, you receive a credential, a piece of paper, that theoretically guarantees future stability and access. It's a long-term bond based entirely on institutional prestige.
You are buying the brand name, hoping the market still values that brand 4 years from now.
Exactly. But this student, acting as a pure strategist, was looking for immediate, practical ROI.
And an internship in Vietnam gave them that.
Think about it. An internship on the ground in a rapidly developing economy offers active, real-world navigation. Think about the difference in the learning mechanism.
It's totally hands-on.
You are not sitting in a lecture hall reading a static case study about a hypothetical supply chain issue from 5 years ago. You are standing in a warehouse or an office, actively dealing with a real, bleeding-edge supply chain issue today.
So the student completely redefined what success and safety actually look like.
They did. They decided that active real-world navigation and experiential learning yielded a significantly higher return on their time than passive theoretical mastery in a classroom.
They realized that knowing how the world works in real time is infinitely more valuable than knowing what a textbook says about how the world used to work.
And we really must acknowledge the intense societal, cultural, and familial pressure placed on international students to conform to the academic grind. It is immense.
The pressure not to fail, the pressure to get the 4.0. Exactly. To reject that pressure, to look at the universally coveted 4.0 GPA and say, no, the math doesn't work for me, I'm going to Vietnam, takes a profound level of self-trust and conviction.
They chose to be a chill dropout because, in their deeply calculated matrix, real-world competence was the actual safety net.
The piece of paper was just an inefficient proxy for that competence.
They built their safety net out of actual tested skills rather than perceived institutional prestige.
It's a brilliant way to live.
It really is. And that brings us to the core lessons of this entire deep dive. This single profile of an unconventional, highly strategic student gives us so much to evaluate in our own lives.
So many takeaways here.
We've explored how alternative educational foundations, that you versus you mentality, can completely rewire the brain, shifting our metrics away from external status and toward internal efficiency.
We have seen the sheer power of treating rigid traditional systems like strategy games. We've learned that you can optimize for your unique strengths and unapologetically view your weaknesses not as moral failures, but simply as variables to be managed or bypassed entirely.
We've unpacked the vital daily importance of constantly calculating the personal ROI of your time. Even when a massive institution or your current employer is handing you tragic ROI reading assignments or endless busy work,
You have the right, and maybe the obligation to yourself, to run the math on what you're actually getting out of it.
absolutely. And perhaps most importantly, we have seen the immense courage it takes to recognize when an operating system is incompatible with your goals.
The willingness to pause, pivot, and actively seek out real-world value when theoretical compliant learning reaches a point of diminishing returns.
So I want to address you listening to this right now. Take a hard look at your own life. Look at your current workload, your studies, your daily habits, your career trajectory.
Where are you bleeding time?
Exactly. Where are you grinding 24/7? Where are you sitting in your own version of that 2 a.m. fluorescent lit library, drinking your third cup of coffee?
Chasing a metric that might not even matter.
Are you exhausting yourself chasing a 4.0 in a game that doesn't actually align with your real-world goals? Are you pursuing status, or are you pursuing growth?
It is time to ask yourself the strategist's ultimate question. What is your ROI?
Such a powerful question.
And I will leave you with a final lingering thought to build on everything we've analyzed today from these essays.
Lay it on us.
Imagine if our entire global education system wasn't built around strict compliance, institutional risk shifting, and ranking students on a manufactured scale of 1 to 100.
Hard to picture, but okay.
What if, instead, the entire structural foundation of schooling was built around the student's concept of personal ROI? What would a university even look like?
That is fascinating.
Would physical campuses, massive lecture halls, and rigid four-year degree paths disappear entirely? And would they be replaced by a decentralized global network of immediate real-world internships and apprenticeships?
Where you only ever invest your time in learning exactly what you need to navigate the world directly in front of you.
That's exactly.
It is a wild, paradigm-shifting thought experiment. Imagine a world with no massive libraries, no 3 coffee cups at 2 a.m., just pure, unadulterated, real-world ROI.
Dude changes everything.
Definitely something to chew on the next time you are faced with a stack of tragic pre-reading. Catch you in the next one.